Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, KFYO. Thank you very much for tuning in today. We visit with the editor, our good friend, the Quorum Report, Scott Braddock. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, Chad. I'm right back from Rockport, Fulton. Spent the week on the coast. There's nothing better, and nothing better than that to remind you of just how awful it is back here in Austin.
Well, at least Rockport was nice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's wonderful.
That's good.
2 years after Hurricane Harvey, a lot has been rebuilt down on the coast, although you still do see storm damage from 2 years ago, on some of the rooftops, and you can see where buildings have been completely leveled and not rebuilt to just have a concrete slab there where something used to be.
Yeah.
The reality of a hurricane, of course, and I covered a lot of these when I was working on the Gulf Coast in the Houston market. The reality and the political reality comes not in the days after the storm, but in the weeks, months, and years after the storm, when federal aid and state aid is slow to come in, and people have not been able to rebuild as they were promised they would be able to, and so they continue to be aggravated by some of the very slow progress, not only there but also in the Houston area. But you had Governor Abbott come in. He was in, and you go where the story is, Chad. He was in Rockport, Fulton over the weekend and talking about how this may have lashed out at Texas. The storm may have battered us around, but we're never beaten, and we'll be ready for the next storm. But if you ask the local officials, they'll say we're not quite ready yet. There's a lot more that needs to be done. Yeah,
they're not ready for another one. That is for sure. Let's talk about a story that just it continues to play out drip by drip, and that is the Speaker Bonnen, Representative Burrows, and Michael Quinn Sullivan story. That it seems like every day something new is coming out about this.
Yeah, over the weekend, and I reported this online on Twitter, that there was a letter that's being circulated among Republican members of the Texas House right now demanding that Sullivan release the audio. So much controversy has been sparked by this meeting that was had on June 12th, which we've talked about so many times here on KFYO, this meeting between Dustin Burrows, Speaker Bonnen, and Michael Quinn Sullivan, that Sullivan says he recorded, and that enough people have said that they heard the audio now that it's pretty well established the audio exists. Of course, this is all under investigation by the Texas Rangers, the elite investigating force here in the state. This letter that's being circulated among Republicans just says that they're requesting the public release of the audio recording of your meeting with Speaker Bonnen and Representative Burrows on June 12th. The accusations you, Sullivan, have made have warranted an investigation. Releasing the recording publicly will allow Texans the ability to fully grasp and contextualize the allegations made. Texans need to know the truth, and I'm told that quite a few lawmakers have signed on to this so far. We don't have a full tally just yet, but it may be, and this is what happens within caucus politics. Of course, you had Burrows step down as caucus chairman. Stephanie Click, who's from Tarrant County, stepped into that role, representative from Fort Worth, and she's been a little slow to move as the new caucus chairman on some of this stuff. Of course, they have the need to elect a vice chair at this point because Burrows stepped aside. Click was the vice chair, and she moved up. And so not only do you have Republicans arguing about whether they ought to have this tape released, and I think there's going to be some maybe if not unanimous, you will probably see a lot of Republicans come forward and say that. A lot of publicly said that already, right? But they also have this argument about who ought to lead the caucus, who ought to be in charge of the Republican caucus going forward, because one of the main reasons to have a caucus, not just the legislative session and working together to try to pass conservative or Republican legislation, but also and maybe even more important is to protect the Republican majority in the Texas House, working together to do that. And so, who is the leadership team now? That the old leadership team, or the former leadership team, is no longer in place because of this scandal, and there is a move to try to simply have the Republican lawmakers vote electronically, just for somebody who might be the next vice chairman. It looks like there's a couple of nominees. One is from Central Texas, one is from Houston. There are those who say, no, we don't need to just, phone it in, so to speak, that we actually need to get together and have a meeting about this, a discussion of who ought to lead the Republicans going forward. And, of course, you have to imagine that the subtext there is not just that they want to talk about who the vice chair ought to be, but also that they should get together and talk about this whole controversy with Speaker Bonnen. There has not been, since this whole story broke, Chad, there has not been a moment where all the Texas House Republicans have been in the same place physically to talk about all of this stuff. So a discussion about it is probably something they really want to have.
Scott, let me ask you, let's say they circulate this letter and they send the letter to Michael Quinn Sullivan. Other than, and I believe Stickland, when he was on my show, said that he did not think the audio should be released. Have there been any other people who have heard the audio who have said the audio should not be released? I'm talking about lawmakers, not those with Empower Texans.
Yeah, well, Steve Toth, who's a lawmaker from the Woodlands, had said the same thing. I think in the Dallas Morning News, maybe a couple of other newspapers. He made the comments that people who think the audio ought to just be released are folks who have not heard it and don't understand what kind of damage it might do to the Republican Party. As you know, others have come out who have heard the audio and said that that's not the case at all, that whether it does damage to the Republican Party or not, that it ought to be heard so that people can make up their own minds. And as you and I have said repeatedly here on the show, if Empower Texans really is media, which they're suing to try to be, then they ought to act like media and publish the findings of what they say is their investigative journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you just look at it, there's some pretty big names who want this thing released, and especially some strategists. You look at Matt Makoviak, who said on this show he wants it released. You've seen Jason Johnson, who was a top strategist from the Cruz campaign, who wants it released. You have the lieutenant governor who wants this released. I mean, there's some pretty big names who want this thing released. I mean, forget about everyone in the media who wants it released. It's just, to me, if they're worried about protecting the Republicans, which is kind of funny to me, if they're that worried about that, I mean, that's just that doesn't carry any weight now. That argument carries no weight.
That's right, especially based on who is saying it. It's hysterical that Empower Texans wants to be above it all and claim that they don't want to hurt Republicans when most of the business model of Empower Texans, if I can say it that way, most of their business model has been to attack Republicans in their primaries and try to defeat them in their elections. And so, yes, hurting the Republican Party is something they've never had a problem with before. And by the way, I would add that Jason Johnson, it's interesting that he's in the mix as somebody who's calling for the release of the tape because, as you said, worked with Senator Cruz to get him elected. And, of course, I guess I would bring his name in because there are people sort of on both sides of the Empower Texans question, whether they've been supporters of Empower Texans or happy to have the support of Empower Texans in the past. As you know, Senator Cruz was very happy to have the support of Empower Texans when he was running for Senate. So those folks were aligned before, and now they're not on this question. And so I think for the sake of transparency, you would go ahead and release the tape. But these folks don't seem to be as interested in transparency as they are interested in causing chaos within the Republican Party. And it's also funny, just from the standpoint of not releasing the tape seems to be what's causing so much turmoil within the Republican Party. So if they say that releasing it would cause damage, look, there's damage being done right now by keeping it sort of shrouded in secrecy.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the story of the story about what was said on the tape or in the audio, that's dead. I mean, no one's talking about what the speaker said. No one's talking about that anymore. It's almost a cold conservative civil war being played out on social media about release the audio. That's the big controversy at this point.
It is, and enough people have heard the tape now that the reason that people aren't as focused on exactly what the speaker or Representative Burrows had to say is because what they said has pretty much been substantiated. Everyone who's come out of the attorney's office for Empower Texans, where they're hearing this audio, everyone's pretty much had the same exact story, right?
Yeah.
That here are the things that were said. Some things that were pretty offensive were said, apparently by the speaker, which, by the way, he has apologized for, as we reported here on KFYO. He said that he was very sorry for the, quote, terrible things that he said. Politically, it may be that when the audio comes out, if it ever comes out, that it could be bad for Republicans, in the short term, because you would have the third most powerful office holder in the state, the Speaker of the House, saying some very, very maybe lewd and damaging things, some things that may be particularly offensive to the LGBT community as well as women. But you let the chips fall where they may. And look, if it comes down to it and it means that the Speaker is such a liability for the Republican Party that he has to go, I mean, that may be what Empower Texans wants. But I can tell you that if he's on that tape saying those horrible things and it's heard by Texans at large, then you may have Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, then also calling for the Speaker to step aside, because right now there's so much tit for tat and so much back and forth that I think average folks, maybe their eyes are sort of glazing over when they see this in the newspaper or hear about it on the radio. There's a lot of twists and turns, and it's hard to keep up with it all. But if you hear the Speaker saying things that are sort of on par with, or maybe not on par with, but are sort of comparable to what President Trump said on that Access Hollywood tape, something that's that shocking, in other words, then that's not difficult to explain, and that could be sort of like a neutron bomb that goes off politically.
Yeah, if there's anything like that.
And that's all a big if, right? And that's one of the reasons people have been questioning Empower Texans about, their credibility on this, not releasing the tape. It has a lot of people thinking, well, you've built it up so much, and how many times have we seen it, Chad, where somebody will build something up so much, build it up, and then you actually hear it or see it, and it's not that big a deal.
Yeah. Let's move on. There's some other news out there. The Texas gun rights lobby pushing back on some new calls made for new laws in the wake of that El Paso shooting.
Yeah, and of course we knew this would happen, and you have the lieutenant governor who has said, he doesn't want to see a red flag law, which we've talked about here, this law that would keep people from getting guns if they've been adjudicated to be a harm to themselves or others. But they did have that closed-door meeting late last week at the Capitol with lawmakers and law enforcement in response to what has gone down in El Paso and the wake of this horrible shooting there with this guy who had posted all sorts of, he's got his manifesto and all sorts of insane stuff that this guy had posted online. But when you look at the kinds of things that they're talking about, with more background checks, the red flag law and all that, you have folks like Alice Tripp, for example, who I'm sure you've talked to before, with, the Texas State Rifle Association just saying no, no, and no, we don't want any of this. And so a lot of pushback. And I think, at least for now, the way the legislature is composed, the overwhelming Republican majorities, I don't think you're going to see them moving to enact any new gun laws. But of course, if the elections go a little bit differently next year, that could be a different calculus.
Scott, one thing that I was surprised about last week was the governor. He seemed to come out in favor of wanting to prohibit private sales and the so-called gun show loophole.
Yeah.
And he gave I don't have the quote right in front of me, but he said, where someone could, sell accidentally to a terrorist privately, we've got to do something to stop that. That was language that kind of surprised me coming from Governor Abbott.
Yeah, and he seems to be more willing to go there, right? After the Santa Fe shooting in southeast Texas, he was the one to say, let's take a look at these red flag laws. And then after El Paso, he says what you just said, he said. And it has been the lieutenant governor who has pushed back on that quickly. One of the points that I've made about this is, look, wherever you are on this issue, these guys all wield different kinds of power. And there is nothing that, as far as his career in the governor's office is concerned, there's nothing the governor has explicitly asked for publicly on his desk that lawmakers have not given him. You name the issue, whether it's school funding or property tax legislation or sanctuary cities ban or whatever. If he said they'd pass it, they passed it. But when it has come to gun laws, when the lieutenant governor has pushed back on him, he's retreated pretty quickly. We'll see if that happens again.
Yeah. Before we let you go, Scott, what the next Democrat debate, the one in Houston, is this going to be a 2-night debate now?
Oh, man, I hope not. These things are so tiresome. Like we like to say, we watch these things so you don't have to. But they are closing in on perhaps having a 2-night debate because, as you know, they have certain rules for these candidates to get into the debate. And it looked like it was just going to be a single one-night thing with 10 candidates. But it looks like a couple more of these candidates might qualify to be in the debate, which would push it over, and we'd have 2 nights once again on a Thursday and Friday.
When is that debate?
That's coming up, September 13th.
Okay, all right.
That's right.
Yeah. Well,
if I have that wrong, I'll double-check.
Well, I guess we'll see what happens with that, Scott. Tell people another 2-nighter, my goodness. Tell folks,
it's a world beating.
Tell folks what they can find at quorumreport.com.
You can find all of the latest twists and turns in this story about what is happening. And it's September 12th, by the way, 12th and 13th. I think I had that right. You can find out everything that's happening, with this crazy story with the speaker, all the twists and turns. And if there is any new news to tell you about, you can sign up for our free email alerts there at quorumreport.com.
All right, Scott, as always, appreciate your time. We'll visit with you, not next week. I'll be gone next week, but the week after next. We'll catch you.
Enjoy the time off.
All right. Thank you very much. That's Scott Braddock, editor, Quorum Report.